Greetings once again from that Gnostic teacher on the internet. So here we come to the fourth talk in this series on Sophianic versus Semitic. And the moment has come to talk about the Sophianic Mythogen. Now, consistent with my, let's say, new style of delivery, I'm front-loading the talk. So I'm telling you at the beginning the takeaway, the conclusion, the point, the objective of what you're going to hear in the following half hour. The Sophianic Mythogen, unlike any other mythic narrative that you will ever encounter. And the uniqueness of it is due to many factors, but principally to the way that it invites your participation. It is an unfinished myth. It is a myth in progress. It is a myth that has been set up by divine powers, the aeons. But they are not like other gods that you have heard about. For instance, gods who are omniscient and who know everything and know how everything is going to end, how everything is going to be concluded, because they dictate the concluding chapter of the human story. In the Sophianic Mythogen, the concluding chapters of the human story are unwritten. How are they to be written? How are they to be scripted? By your involvement, by your participation. And that participation, listen well, is not merely a matter of faith. Far from it. Of course, there is an element of faith involved. Faith is a property of human consciousness. Faith and trust are inherent to the human psyche and to the morality of the human species. But in the process of engaging and elaborating and completing the Sophianic narrative, you do not rely solely on faith. You rely strongly on common sense, your connection to nature, your feeling for beauty, your sympathy for other human animals, and especially for non-human animals, your courage, your visionary capacity, your power of imagination, and your probity. Probity, meaning the inherent skill of the human animal to observe, collect, and observe and examine facts and evidence and draw a conclusion from those facts and evidence. The probative faculty is a Gnostic talent. Everyone has it, but Gnostics develop it to the highest degree of sophistication and efficacy. And there is another element as well. I can't think of a better way to introduce the Sophianic narrative, the fallen goddess scenario, the home story. We use those names interchangeably. You may use those names interchangeably. There's another way to introduce it and to indicate for you the takeaway of this talk. When you engage the Sophianic Mythogen, you are engaging your sacred birthright as a human being, your sacred birthright as an expression, an example of the human species. It is your birthright to know this story. And it is your privilege and responsibility to develop this story. There are many engaging factors of attraction in the Sophianic narrative. Beauty, of course, stands foremost in that attraction. It is the beauty of the story and what it affords to you to realize yourself as a human being that puts it beyond any other story. So you know that it is a stand-alone narrative. If you really see what it is, you see it's a stand-alone narrative. It is paramount and superlative. And the other factor of the many that I could select that may well be the strongest element of attraction in this narrative is mystery. It's a mystery, like a mystery story, like a mystery novel. And there is enormous suspense in the mystery. Mystery is a narrative about something powerful, strange, and sacred in which you are profoundly involved even before you ever hear about it. And that mystery deepens in you, in your soul. And that mystery becomes more and more vivid and powerful the more that you experiment with the narrative. So to be involved in the Sophianic Mythogen is to accept that life is a great mystery. But it is a mystery that belongs to you. You, in fact, are the key to that mystery. It is not a mystery in the sense of mumbo-jumbo, fairy tale, pretending, make-believe magic. No, it is not that. Most distinctly not that. I said years ago that there is a difference between the experience of a genuine mystery and the experience of mystification. And when you look at the matter of the occult and the esoteric, handled by incompetent people who are lost in the sauce, who are lost in games of pretending, you find yourself in a fog of mystification. And that fog is thick. And many of those who have entered that fog never find their way through it. But the mystery of the Sophianic Mythogen shows you the way to lead your life transpersonally. And everything that you learn about the mystery and put into practice enhances and enriches and empowers your personal life. As you read in the orientation to the home story, the transpersonal fulfills the personal. The personal cannot fulfill itself. So let's start with the formula of the Mythogen. Perhaps you know it well by now. It's a simple two-part formula. The Mythogen of any racial mythology describes, defines the identity and the mission or purpose of those people who produce that myth and those who live according to that guiding narrative. So what does the Sophianic Mythogen tell you about your identity and your purpose? It tells you something utterly simple and explicit that any child can understand. First of all, it tells you that you are a member of the anthropine species. You are an anthropine animal. And that word anthropos in the Gnostic writings means the germ of the human species. It means literally the human genome. So obviously you, as a human animal, are an expression of the human genome. That's your identity. There's a beautiful saying, often cited by Shaktas, that comes from a precious amulet of gold leaf that was found in Petelia in southern Italy. And it says, I am a child of earth and starry heavens, but my origins are in heaven alone. You yourselves know this. So the identity factor in the Mythogen of the Sophianic narrative begins there. It identifies you as a member, an expression, an example of the anthropos, a genome that was designed in the galactic center, in the pleroma of this galaxy. What about purpose? What about mission? What about mandate? What it says there is that you are living in a divine experiment. And the purpose of your life is first to know that you are living in a divine experiment, to have the gnosis of that transcendental fact, and then to fulfill your particular role in the experiment. So obviously you have to know what the experiment is, how it is set up, to find your place in the experiment, and then personally and individually, you enact your life, you live your life according to a transcendental and transpersonal view of life. And in that way, you have your cake and eat it too. In that way, you get it both ways. In that way, you get to live and fulfill the divine experiment, which is unfolding here on the planet Earth. So that's the takeaway. And all of that, all of those, both of those 2 points sit at the core of the mystery of human existence. Now, the Gnostic intel about this divine experiment that you're in is, I can assure you, dazzling and impeccable. It is brilliant, it is precise, and it is extremely elaborate. So you're not engaging the mystery and trying to find your way into the experiment by simply stumbling around and guessing or making believe or pretending that anything goes and it could be anything that you want it to be. No, it cannot be anything that you want it to be. This experiment arises from the desire of divine beings, the desire of the aeons. It is their desire to create this experiment. And so when you know what they desire, then you are not acting merely out of your own personal desire and living your life as if it were your business alone. I've often said that one of the first realizations that comes to people in planetary Tantra comes to people who learn the narrative. And this is a realization of liberation. Your life is not your own. It belongs to you. It's lent to you for you to use as if it were your own. But in fact, your life is a medium of expression for those aeonic powers who designed you in the pleroma and who have set you up in an experiment. The purpose of the experiment is to thrive in coevolution with your natural setting and with the other animals and plants in that setting. The purpose of the experiment was called by the ancient alchemists the great work. Coevolution is the great work. So, in summary, by way of a distillation, you can say that your purpose, defined in the Sophianic Mythogen, is to live and thrive and delight in the creative symbiosis of life itself. Now, in the remainder of this talk, I'll see what I can say. I'll see what comes up. But my main purpose is to make 2 points. One concerns the form in which you receive the Mythogen, and the other concerns the way that the Sophianic Mythogen stands against the Semitic Mythogen. It stands against it. Remember, I said the relation of these two mythic structures, these two narratives, is adversarial. So the point is, the second point I wish to make in concluding, is that if you know the Sophianic Mythogen and you identify with it, then you have a narrative that empowers you to overcome the Semitic narrative that is operating globally on this planet in a massive and many-faceted orchestration of life-hating deceit. You have that power. That power resides in this narrative and in the techniques and practices that go along with it, the practices of the living gnosis today. By the way, to those of you insiders on Planetary Tantra, you Shaktas out there, I just want to say that it has just started to rain torrentially. The rain in Spain takes away the pain. And you probably can't hear it due to the podcast mic that I'm using. But I've opened the window and I'm listening to the rainfall as I speak. Now, going to the first point, it's really, really important that you know where this Mythogen comes from, how you got it, how it got to be here, how it got to be represented in its current form. To understand that crucial factor in the inheritance of your sacred birthright, you simply need to know that there are two aspects or two dimensions to the Sophianic Mythogen. One of them is the received material, and the other is the material in development. So what is the received material? Well, as I noted in another talk, the teaching, the instruction, the legacy of the Sophianic message to humanity and the story of the divine Sophia herself is the most forbidden, repressed, attacked, and demonized body of knowledge on the entire planet. It's a miracle that it even survives at all. But it does survive in certain writings, the Gnostic, Coptic codices, and also in other writings closely related to that central body of work. So, from that received material, someone who happened to be yours truthfully, the comparative mythologist, I was going to say creative mythologist, and that works too if you like that. See how that wears on you. A certain comparative mythologist reconstructed the foundation of the myth from the received materials. And that's what you find in the home story. However, that's just the beginning. It's like the foundations of a house. And upon those foundations, which are sunk into the ground, you build and you construct the house. So the remaining part of the Sophianic narrative and the myth is in development. And it's a responsibility to all who choose to undertake it to join in that development. And to do so, I assure you, is a discipline. It's a discipline like any art, like learning to play the piano, learning to sail, rock climbing. It's a discipline like any others. So, needless to say, to learn the narrative requires some dedication to that foundation story, which has been carefully and meticulously recovered and reconstructed from the few, pitifully few, jumbled and muddled surviving remnants of the great Teleste, the teachers of the mysteries. The home story is designated as FGS 1.5. So that's a way of indicating that it is an iteration of a number of versions. Actually, I couldn't tell you how many versions I went through to get to the home story in its current form. But all of those iterations and all of those versions apply simply to the foundation. You will note that in the 9th episode of the home story, the human species hasn't even appeared yet on Earth. The appearance of the human species comes after the explosion. Remember the last line? And then came the explosion. Well, specifically, that is the Cambrian explosion, which is recognized as a geological event that happened, they say, according to their narrative, according to their myth, they say, what, 550 million years ago. And coming forward from the Cambrian explosion, the genome of the human species seeds upon the planet, and the variations of that genome in the various regions of the world develop into the races. Now, I want to make it clear that the language to use, the language I encourage you to use regarding the anthropos in the Sophianic narrative, sets a clear distinction between species and race. So there is no human race, it's a misnomer. There are human races, but there is only one human species, the anthropos. So you are an anthropine, and in fact you are just another animal, like a canine, like a feline. You see? You're just another species of animal in the divine experiment. But the Mythogen teaches that you, as an anthropine or human animal, have a particular role, and you have an exceptional role to play in how the experiment works out. Other animals also play parts in how the experiment works out. Oh, yes, they do. They hold the experiment in profound and magnificent ways, a June bug, as well as a great blue whale, holds this experiment. But the role of the human animal is exceptional, but not superior in the sense of superiority that you find, for instance, written deeply into the malware of the Semitic narrative. So here's an occasion to contrast the Sophianic and Semitic narratives. I'll devote the fifth talk to a more detailed explanation of that contrast. But here's one way to highlight that contrast. While the Semitic narrative is about racial supremacy, the super race of the Elohim being the overlords of the earth, according to their script, Sophianic Mythogen is about racial singularity. And the word singularity, which is monogenes in Greek and is found in the Coptic writings, or in the Gnostic writings, in Coptic and Greek, that word plays in two ways. In the first place, each human individual is a singularity that carries the power of the entire experiment and can determine the outcome of the experiment. There's a saying in planetary Tantra, the fate of the kalpa rides on one life at a time. This is an expression of singularity. So singularity refers to you as an individual human animal, but it also refers to the fact that from the viewpoint of the aeons who designed our species is a singularity. It's their singularity. So the Sophianic narrative is a myth of singularity and not supremacy. A little more specialist terminology, a little more jargon. Every field of science or the arts or politics or whatever has its jargon. So here's the Gnostic jargon. The human species is one, the anthropos. But it evolves, it develops into a spectrum of races. And the races are called the Rome. Now, Rome is a beautiful word taken directly from Coptic. It is, in fact, the Coptic word for humanity. R-H-O-M-E. And the beauty of this word can be seen in its exquisite construction. The R-H-O corresponds to the Greek letter rho, and it alludes to roa, which is a pomegranate. And the suffix me is in Coptic the word for love. But it is also a Sumerian word that refers to the standards or principles of creation. The me. They are the divine principles of life. They are the operating rules of the system of life, the me. But me in Coptic also means love. So this word Rome is your word of self-identification in the Sophianic Mythogen. And Shaktas, those who revere and share the power of the Divine Mother, Sophia, call themselves Rome. And it's a word that you use in plural and singular expression. So you can say, I am Rome, and you can speak of the Rome as the totality of the spectrum of all of the diverse races that arise over the course of time in the different regions of the world. The territorial ethnicities of the human population is the Rome, and you are Rome. So you are flesh and blood Rome. But hold on. Yeah, hold on. because there is a precise Gnostic distinction between Rome and Anthropos. And when you know this distinction, you know something that is, I don't know what to say. I'll let you decide for yourself. The Anthropos is the human genome. And in a way, you could say it's humanity. And in a way, you might think, well, when I walk around the earth, and I encounter people, maybe I'm Brazilian, maybe I'm Japanese, maybe I'm Chinese, maybe I'm Finnish, and you see all these other ethnicities of the human races, the Rome, you might tend to think, if you don't know this distinction, that what you are looking at are flesh and blood examples of the Anthropos. But they're not. There is no flesh and blood example solely of the Anthropos itself. Neither you nor anyone else in all of time ever has or ever will see the anthropic humanity standing in front of you. So you don't see humanity in the universal sense. What you see is a racial derivative of the anthropine genome. This is an extremely important distinction, and it goes to the adversarial conflict between the Semitic and the Sophianic Mythogens. You see, there's an essential lie. There are many lies, but there's a fundamental lie in the Semitic Mythogen that has been broadcasted into the face of everyone that has ever lived. And this is the lie of universality. So the people who propagate this lie, who endorse it and enforce it, come to you with the righteous claim, the righteous superiority that they stand for humanity in total. They stand for the Anthropos, humanity, but they don't. Nobody stands for that. It is transcendent. It is imaginal. You can imagine it, but you never meet it in flesh and blood. The only thing you meet are the racial derivatives. So you can only meet someone of a particular race, and that race itself is the expression of a long evolution of one strain, one strand, one thread coming out of the master complex of the human genome. That being the case, the view of humanity in Sophianic terms totally and absolutely rejects universality, and it rejects every example and icon of universality. Now I ask you, what comes to mind as the icon of universality? Or to put it in other words, have you ever encountered a figure that is presumed to be or presented to you as the representative of humanity, the ideal human being, the perfect human being? Well, of course, that would be Christ, or the hybrid Jesus Christ, Jesus being the human part, and Christ, which means anointing, the anointed one, referring to the divine part. So Jesus Christ is a divine human hybrid, according to that Christian narrative, which is nothing but a variation of the Semitic narrative, and it comes to you as an enormous deceit. There is no single representative of the Anthropos alone. There are only racial variations of that genome. So the jargon in Gnostic terms goes like this. The formula of instruction goes like this. You have to imagine the Anthropos. It's an imaginal entity, but you directly perceive and encounter the Rome. The anthropos is imaginal. The Rome are biological and existential. And this distinction is absolutely unequivocal. As long as you hold to this distinction, no one can ever sell you a proposition based on them coming to you and saying that they represent humanity, that they are humanitarians, that they stand for universal human rights, that they stand for equality and justice, because all of those programs are deceitful, hateful programs coming out of the Semitic narrative. Now, to move on to my second point, all that is about the identity factor in the Sophianic Mythogen. Now, to come to my final point, I don't want to run on too long. Let me talk about the nature of the experiment. Well, obviously, I could talk for days about the nature of the experiment and how it's set up. But basically, what you need to know is that the human genome is a product of divine design. 2 aeons in the galactic core, in the material, astronomical core of this galaxy, I mean material, designed the anthropos as a singularity. They encoded that singularity with skills and talents and abilities and traits, of which there are specifically 7. It's called the calibration of the anthropos. And then they followed normal procedures, because they are scientists and artists who follow normal techniques and procedures, and they projected that genomic plasm, which is a plasm, which is material, it is encoded nucleic acid. They projected it into the outer arms of the galaxy. They nested it in a certain area, which is M31, the Orion galaxy, the Orion Nebula. And from there, they allowed the natural currents that operate in the spinning of the galactic arms to pull filaments of the genome out, carrying propagules or seeds that then dropped into planetary systems. This notion, by the way, is not merely a fantasy of Gnostics such as myself, but it's a well-known scientific concept called directed panspermia that was proposed by a Swedish man, I believe, who was a Nobel Prize scientist. So yeah, are you getting this? I mean, this is a cosmic picture, but it's your cosmic picture. You're in the frame of the cosmic picture. In fact, you're, to put it in an amiable and playful way, you are the key subject of this divine experiment. You are the pet species of Sophia and Thelete, who designed the genome. Now, the point I want to make in closing is that there are many, many things to learn about the web of symbiosis of life. And everything that you can learn about it, everything that you can learn about nature and the relation of human animals to non-human animals and to plants and to the rivers, the mountains, the sky, and the seas, everything that you can learn about that belongs to the beautiful tapestry of this narrative. And one of the things that you learn, which is, I would say, a leading concept for you to get your mind around how the experiment works, is that it works by competition and cooperation. So when you look at nature, you see competition between different animals and different species. But you also see cooperation. As a matter of fact, there are 2 scientific paradigms that define those behaviors. One is the Darwinian paradigm of survival of the fittest. Everything is tooth and nail competition. No, there is competition. Yeah, that makes the experiment interesting. But the terms of the competition need to be examined very carefully. The second aspect of the experiment is cooperation. Now, there was a Russian scientist and philosopher called Kropotkin, who actually argued openly with the Darwinians in the 19th century. And he said that according to his observations, the principle of mutual aid was even more present in nature than the principle of Darwinian competition. So what you have is living creatures that compete and cooperate. And you have human races that compete and cooperate. And that basically, fundamentally, is how the experiment has been set up. The way that those behaviors work out determines how the experiment works out. So I'm going to stop here because already this talk is beyond 35-minute range, which I limit that I'm setting in my new style of delivery. But I'm wondering if I've caught your attention and if you are maybe just a little bit intrigued by this idea of the divine experiment. So I will devote other episodes in the playlist of Myth Wars to talking more about that fabulous and exciting subject.